Welcome to a Yarn Live. I'm your host, Ryan the Lion Ashton, and this is our series about burnout. Wow, we're going to get into a great series. We've got 4 speakers. I've got the first with me. I'll introduce him in a second. And we're going to have 4 speakers over the course of March. First of all, looking at lived experiences. So the likes of Saravajith and Gareth, who are the first 2 speakers, will be sharing lived experiences. And then we'll move over to the professional perspective, hearing from Sean Bowler, who is a registered psychologist and obviously treats people with burnout. And then we'll hear from Professor Jarrod Haar from an HR perspective. So let me introduce Sarvajith, and of course I'll keep my introduction brief because our first question is, can you introduce yourself so we can meet the person? And then we'll get into this big important subject of burnout. So Sarvajith, I first met him through AFQY. He was brought along by another attendee, of course. And over the years, we've got to know each other. We might have sung a few karaoke songs together. And in fact, he might have sung and I might have screeched, but that's another story. But comes from the tech industry and has a deep background in tech. So that kind of introduces the work background. Now, if I could ask you to introduce yourself so we can meet the person, mate. And pleasure to have you on board.
Thanks, Ryan. I think whenever I do intros, it's always something work-related. So I've never done like a personal intro before. So this is new for me. So I'm a huge cricket fanatic. I grew up with cricket. It's one of my passions in my life. And as I was growing up, I played a lot in New Zealand. But as I was doing that, I went through my university where really my profession as a software engineer began. So transitioning from sport to the professional world was a little bit weird for me, but I made that happen after I finished university and did a couple of years overseas playing the sport. But
so you played overseas. Do we chuck in the word professional or semi-professional? Or?
Semi-professional, yeah. I played in England, and I went to India for a season as well.
Oh wow!
But yeah,
now I know how to have on my team for the backyard cricket competition.
Yeah.
And I heard you were pretty good at rugby as well. Is that a myth or is that truth?
That's a myth. That's a myth. I never played rugby. That is an absolute myth. I remember, though, in intermediate, I signed up for the school rugby league team, and we just moved to New Zealand a couple of years before that. And my mum heard that I had signed up and started crying because she was like, "Oh, Indians aren't made for rugby. He might die."
Mate, you're a pretty robust character, I think.
Yeah, I'm robust. I'm robust, but that's just that mentality, I guess.
Children, fair enough.
Yeah. So look, over the last few years, I've moved from being a software engineer to more the product side of things, more leadership and exec roles, and yeah, what we're talking about here, end of 2021, was when I experienced burnout. So Ryan, whenever you want me to get into that, let me know.
Yeah, well, let's get into it. So the way I thought was, this is all about the lived experience. So what I aim for the listeners to understand is, if they haven't been through it, to get an idea. And we're going to have the professional perspective, so you get both sides. So ideally, the things that you felt, the things that you were going through. I've mentioned before that I've been through it, and it's about 3 times I pushed myself to a point where I then started working my way backwards. So it's quite fortuitous that I was able to do that and not push myself right to the edge or go over it. So giving them that understanding of what those feelings are like, because I got confused and thought it was depression. And ironically, when I feel depressed, or if I feel depression, I do more work because I feel the achievement, whether it's weeding the garden or doing actual business work. We've got our first comment up, and this is related to the being a robust character. I don't know if you know Kevin, but
yeah. Thanks, cool. Kevin.
Yeah. But where was I? Anyway, I'll insert my little bits as you tell us. So if you could tell us, what was your lived experience? How did it come on? Did you know what it was to begin with? How did you know it was burnout? And how did you then start looking at recovery, and what did you do, and how did you go about it? And yeah, take us through that journey.
Yeah, I think that it's a mentality thing when it comes to me in particular, but my brother might share some of the same traits in terms of we work super hard, right? Like our philosophy is, if we're going to do something, we're going to do something 1000% and get it done. Like that's our whole philosophy. And my brother is obviously uber successful, and he's so passionate about the technology world as well. And I am very much the same, but people aren't the same, right? Some people are more resilient to working like that than others. And I think the key is understanding when you've hit your limit. And I understood that September 2021, when I remember I hadn't exercised for a while, and this was 3 to 4 months of working. We were doing a couple of transformation programs at quite a high growth company, and I went for a run and my chest just tightened up. I thought I was having a heart attack, and I remember walking after that, and everything kind of loosened up and my chest freed up a little bit, and it just didn't feel good, right? I had worked myself into the ground, and when I say worked myself into the ground, I'm talking about 12 to 16 hours a day, sometimes all-nighters, and mainly because the company was growing so fast, and there were a few time zones, so like the UK, US, etc., to manage across. So it was a constant sort of work to get a high growth startup into a place where it was established and moving into the next phase. So I got to that point and I was like, I didn't really realize it because my mentality had always been work is work, right? You just go get it done, do whatever it takes.
Yeah, exactly.
But this was kind of, yeah, but this was the checkpoint for me. And I was like, I'm 34 at the time, and 35 at the time, sorry. And I'm having something that resembles a heart attack, or what it might resemble. My chest tightened up, right?
Yeah.
And that was for me the checkpoint to go, okay, I need to think about what's happening here. I took a week off in October and reflected on the months that had been. And I noticed myself doing things like checking Slack every few, because the revenue sales used to go into Slack in their company.
Yeah.
And I used to check Slack, I would say 3 or 4 times a minute, right? Just to see, because we were going through this transformation program and I wanted to really work, so I was kind of in the mode of, okay, let's just get this thing done right. And I noticed that the things that I was doing just weren't normal. Checking Slack that many times a minute, just feeling really stressed out if the dollar amount wasn't quite where it should be, So all of these things were a big signal for me. And then I kind of, in my mind, subconsciously decided that I'd start handing over. And I think subconsciously I started doing that. I started documenting. And December that year, I resigned. And to be honest, with a really great offer, and the company, great people, all of that. I kind of had this opportunity to really grow from a career perspective, but yeah, it just felt wrong to me to work like that. And the other note there is, we'd had our first child in 2020, so September of 2020. right? So he was just one, and I had hardly spent any time with this guy. So he wouldn't even recognize me, to be honest, at that stage. Now, I can take him for walks by myself, right? But that's the kind of stage where I got to, where I paused. It was physiological to begin with, and then I started to dig deeper and understood what was actually going on.
Wow, there's some really amazing points through there. So I'm gonna run through all the points, and then if we can come back to each of them. So the reason I run through them all is so I don't forget, or try not to forget one. But the one thing you said was, we all just work, we just crack on and do it. We don't think about it. And so I want to come back to that point in relation to, yes. And then, as you just finished up saying, you mentioned that you don't think that's the way we should be working. That was at the end. And what happens, I think, is there's some sort of change. Sometimes people go through, or there was the classic midlife crisis. Burnout is not a midlife crisis, but in some ways it has a similar effect, where you start to reevaluate your life and work. You talked about your son not recognizing you. Very similarly, my older brother worked in a high-powered bank IT job overseas. And when he took it on, he hadn't seen his kids for 6 months. And the first time they saw him in 6 months, they cried. And he went and resigned that day. So it's amazing. And I wonder how many other people out there are struck by the same occurrence. And it's one of the checkpoints, as you say. And talking of that, your chest tightening, that's one thing. But the checking Slack all the time and recognizing that wasn't normal. So you won't be surprised when I say that I check LinkedIn too much, like you checked your Slack. And I think it shows, like, I like to look at patterns of behavior. And this is something I'll talk to Sean Bowler, the psychologist that we have on in the third series, is a pattern of behavior. I think if we got more people on, we've got Gareth, Beck coming on with a lived experience as well next week, I think that we'll see this repeat across the lived experiences, where there's this repetitive behavior of checking in on something that's important or relevant to the person. For you, it was Slack and the revenue. For me, it was LinkedIn and the conversations. I think there'll be reasons for each of those. And I think I've looked at mine, like you've talked about documenting. I have mentally documented and looked at things in the past. And I'm primary carer for my wife, and I've spent a lot of time in waiting rooms. So I had a Palm Trio 680 before an iPhone even existed, and that was my best friend, reading the internet and doing a little bit of social media, but it wasn't so big then, as you can imagine, pre-2007. Doing a little bit of social media when I was spending these hours in the waiting room, waiting to find out what's happening next, because you just didn't know, right? Like through different stages. So it kind of become a use of this became quite embedded in me. But I think it's not so it's my personal one, but that repetitive, like, you're always checking. It's always some sort of connection. There's always some sort of is this okay? And I think it's, am I okay? I think is what we're doing. I'm not sure, but that's my theory. I don't know if you've got a theory. So if we come back to that moment when you're running and the chest tightened, that would have been quite a shock. Like, you're I called you robust, but I'd also say you're quite a fit guy, right? Having stood beside you, you don't have the office jockey body shape I do, which is very unfit. So for you to feel that, it would be, I think quite a shock. So when that happened, like, did you stop and go, or did you just sort of keep running and go, well, it's what? Tell us a bit more about that.
I walked the rest of the way, and my sort of exercise mentality used to be, that's changed, and that's something we can talk about as well, if you would like. One of the things is, I'd say I want to run 5Ks, and then until I finished running 5Ks, I wouldn't stop, right? So that was kind of my exercise mentality. Have a goal and just do it, whatever it takes. But that day, it was stop. And I think I see that's like a really good sort of model for how I see work now, right? I don't see work and exercise as an ultimatum. I see it as a process that takes a little bit long, that requires breaks, and also isn't just about the end point. It's also about how you get to that, how you go through that journey. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean, and I'm trying to articulate it in my words as well, because it used to be you just go hard, right? Whether it's a 5K run or the 5-hour sprint to get the piece of work out, whatever it is, or your nighter, you just go hard till it's done. Whereas now we are probably aware that, like, if I'm a couple of hours in and I go, no, take a break, I don't force myself to work through constantly. In fact, I'm probably more likely to stop myself. And yeah, it's just a different mindset or different pace that we work to. So if we then start looking at recovery, I've seen some of your posts around your diorama, some of your artwork. Can you give us a picture of, or maybe before we go to that element, that point where you started doing something about it, or did you see a doctor, see a psychologist? I did, by the way. What steps that to the creative
totally so the first couple of months were very stressful because I think you get into a stage of like earning money becomes a habit, and well, rightly so, right? You got to pay the bills, but also you don't realize how much you earn and you keep in the back pocket sometimes, and how much you spend on stuff that you actually don't need to, right? So the first couple of months of this was one thing I wanted to do is give myself time, right? That's what everyone I'd spoken to had told me. Not even, I hadn't even got to the psychologist at that time. So it was, how do I give myself, and how, with my wife and a 2-year-old child, how do we give ourselves more time? So we did, the financial stuff first. We got the mortgage holiday. We sorted out, various bits and pieces with our spending, cutting all of those things. And that itself was quite a big stress and anxiety thing. So it was nice to get that out of the way first. So then, we had a roadmap, a way to set up our finances that meant I could take, a considerable amount of time. I'm lucky. I am so lucky that I have the opportunity to do this, because, I feel like I had the resources to be able to do that, which not many people do, right? So number one, that was really nice to get that out of the way. And then I started to see a psychologist, and started to work through some of the more deeper problems. One of the things I'd like to say is in 2020, when I was transitioning, just before that, I was working for a company called Juicy. And we went through quite a rough time from March that year. If you remember, that was when COVID started, right?
Yes.
And Juicy was in the transport industry, tourism industry, is in the tourism industry. And as a leadership team there were some really tough decisions, and 6 months of, I would say, pretty tough going for everyone, right? And I got a job offer in August that year. And the reason why I'm going through this, Ryan, I think it's important to give context as well. In August that year, I got a job offer, which was the company I resigned from in 2021 from Burnout. So I'd just been through 6 months of this whole sort of COVID period with a tourism company, got the offer from a high growth startup, signed up, and my son was born on the 28th of September. And on the first 3 days of him being born, I was on the phone with this new company, and I started in the new company on the 5th of October. So all of this seemed normal to me, right? I didn't even give myself time, or my wife and my child, newborn child, anytime. And some personal stuff happened in December, but I used work, and I think it becomes, when I started talking to the psychologist,
the word, if I can jump in, the word habit doesn't quite cover it. It's like a habit times 100. If that's a good way of, like you're very intensely, habitually working, i.e., almost like the rest of the world doesn't seem to exist or doesn't matter. In some ways, there's something I want to sort of emphasize. But sorry, back to you.
And I realized I'd built up all of these habits of like avoiding the important things, right, by working, and I was supplementing, sort of stressing about and worrying about that stuff with work. So it just got more and more intense, and that's what I learned by getting a psychologist on board, and we're still working through that. And I just want to say, like, every person is going to take their own time. They're going to have different ways of recovering. They're going to need different things. I am on some medication as well, for anxiety, for depression, these things. I'm being completely open here, right? Because I think it may help people. So I think it's important. But one of the things that we often don't think about is the habits that we build up. I describe it like practicing for cricket. When you practice a certain shot, say a cover drive, 1,000 times, maybe more, when I was playing, it becomes subconscious, right? So you don't even think about doing it. You see the ball, and if it's in the right place, you play a cover drive. And I think that's how our anxieties and our stresses are. They're because we do it for so long, in my opinion, and talking through with the psychologist, they become kind of this automatic reaction. And based on who you are and how you treat your habits and what sort of personality you have, it either becomes super ingrained or you can just move on. I'm on the other side, where my habits I kind of do and reinforce a lot. So for me, I need more time to recover, and there'll be people with varied amount of times of recovery. So it's fair to say I'm still recovering. But I'm having all of those super hard conversations, not just with my psychologist, but with my family, my friends. And look, there's other personal stuff, right, that I don't want to talk about. Some personal trauma that also kind of contributed to this whole thing, but less so because it was a long time ago, but they all contribute, right? Everyone has all of these things, and everyone's going to have their own recovery period. There's an equation, not an equation, but it's a custom thing. Bringing out the software developer and be custom, like who the hell uses that when it comes to mental illness? Right? It's very subjective. So don't. Man. Yeah, it's very subjective, and there's no. It shouldn't feel embarrassing. It shouldn't feel like a weakness. In fact, I believe, and I'm still going through the process, that in this sort of weird, confusing time, and once you figure it out, I think it becomes a strength. But you've kind of got to recognize it and put yourself through the process, because otherwise, it's so funny. So many people I've spoken to about this have said, I wish I'd taken a break a lot earlier than I did. And, these are people who are in their later 40s, early 50s, 60s, etc. And a lot of people have been through this. And if you're sitting in a meeting room, I can guarantee you some people might even be going through it at that stage. But yeah, that's the common theme is I wish I'd done it earlier.
Well, you reminded me when I was starting my first corporate job, like when I had left running bars and clubs around the world and came back home to have a real life. I remember one of the clients I went to see who was one of two brothers, and both brothers were very famous architects. I used to work in the construction industry. And one architect had the fancy big office in town, and the other architect worked out by himself in his office in Muriwai, and was a bit of a, I don't know if bohemian's the right sort of descriptor, or hippie might be, with no offense. He was quite open and called himself these things. And I asked him, I said, why? And one thing is his brother had, black hair, and this guy had completely grey hair, but he wasn't that old. He was maybe 40. So I sort of noticed that. And I just now remember he said, we used to do all-nighters and we'd be so passionate, but whatever you do, don't do all-nighters. It's not worth it. And as a young 26-year-old, I just sort of heard it, but didn't really. It stuck in my head because it was out of the blue and out of the picture. But it totally talks to what you were talking about now, about people saying should have taken a break earlier, and the fact that we've both gone through burnout and sharing these experiences. So I think there's
interestingly though, Ryan.
Yeah.
Interestingly though, if you don't mind me stopping you there, it's not the case in the workplace. People don't give you that advice, or they never used to, right? Because it's KPI based, and you've got to push hard. And it's that dichotomy that people live, is in their own lives they would have faced this and are potentially going through it, but in the office environment are talking to their staff and pushing them, right? It's very hard to resolve, but that's a cultural problem of corporate life. That's what it is, right? You can turn your head towards, you can try and ignore it, but that's the world you're in. It's a zero-sum game if you're not careful. And I think everyone needs to be aware of that.
So here's an interesting theory. Let's paint a picture that most people have some sort of experience or exposure to burnout, but very few, and this is probably going back before COVID, because a lot more people were talking about it. It's every third article was about burnout, well, every fourth article, but it's pretty prominent, and we're talking about it. So also, in general, people are talking about mental health more than they did 10 years ago, obviously. But what I'm just wondering in the scenario is, while there's a culture of go hard, play hard, work hard, play hard, all this sort of stuff, and just push on through, whether various people experienced it, and rather than actually being able to go and get help or feel like they could, they kept it within themselves. But this is where we see, angry people in the office. This is where we see people being bullies in the office. Did the hiding of it in the past create a backlash or something coming out of the person in another way? Because often that is what causes someone to sort of behave badly or snap. Like, that's one of the things. Like, if I can just introduce this, I got introduced to burnout because a mate sent me an article. This is Grant Middleton. He might have met it in AFQY. And I just responded to him saying, I read it and just responded to him saying, why'd you send me this? ? And his reply was, perhaps your response to me sending you this gives you a little bit of a hint, but I'll say the Ryan I spoke to at AFQY was not the Ryan I normally know. And I was really conscious myself of being bitter and twisted and snappy and aggressive. So, if someone did something that was not necessarily the end of the world, but maybe not the right thing. Rather than just saying, "Oh yeah, hey look, I think a better way" or something like that, I'll be like, "Rah!" And I obviously done this visibly, and I knew I was myself, and was having the feelings of guilt, and then you have the feelings of shame, and you're like, "Oh, I really should apologize to that person and make right in that situation." But then I also feel such shame that I don't want to actually admit to it, because I know that I'm admitting to a problem I have if I do that.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking now, the people that we see who are snappy or aggressive or blunt or rude, there could be all sorts of things, and that's just a personality. But I wonder how much of a percentage of it is the early stages of burnout starting to show through. And then, of course, typically what might happen is that person leaves and goes and gets a job somewhere else before the volcano really goes off in any regards. So yeah, I think there's something in terms of patterns of behaviour that we we'll look into on that one. But we're just coming up on time, so I wanted to see if first of all, you've got a little bit more time, and if you have, let's have a look at the things that you're doing to recover, because I see a lot of creative work that you're doing, from your artwork to the dioramas, which looks quite fascinating. Opening up Sarvajith Studios soon, I hope. But yeah, tell us about the recovery and things that you're doing that are helping.
Some things are good, some things are bad, but I'm more on a process of kind of moving away from being this one-dimensional software engineering guy. I think that's the journey I'm on. Is I feel like I have this other bit of energy that I've just never ever explored before, and that's what I'm doing, right? Whatever it is, I mean, whether it's a diorama, a sketch, or something that isn't technology, right? And that was the other thing, is when I did try and do something different, I went through Coursera and did like a ton of courses. That's the first thing that happened. I was like, okay, I'll switch off and I'll do all of these courses. It was just, I was just stuck in this spiral. So to take me out of that spiral, it was a little bit of, what are the things that I've compromised in my life to be a software engineer / a cricketer? What have I said no to enable those other things to happen? And I made a list, and I've just been doing that. For example, learning to play the piano. That was another thing. Learning art was one thing. Being a good father. I did compromise that for work. Just wanted to see what that's like. Being a good husband. All of these sorts of things that seem trivial, but actually are skills that you learn by doing. I'm still learning how to be a good husband and father, by the way. That's a long process, I think. Has probably the most important things. But yeah, look, I've been doing some art. What it does do for me, which is also not healthy if it's not sort of moderated, is it does switch off my brain from overthinking. And that's one of the things. Like I get anxiety attacks, and they usually happen within like 10 to 30 seconds, right? It starts with a simple thought of, like, say, as simple as I need to go shopping, to in 30 seconds an anxiety attack. And the thought process from going shopping to the anxiety attack, my psychologist asked me to write down a couple of these situations, and each time in 30 seconds I connected so many dots that I could write a full A3 page of bullet points that were connected to lead me to that anxiety attack. So it's about art for me at the moment, is about managing these anxiety attacks, managing just unnecessary overthinking, but also it isn't a solution. It's it's what do you call it? It's just a supplement, right? The solution really is more about spending time by yourself, letting those thoughts come and go, and be more resilient when those thoughts do come into your head. That's the practice that I'm looking at, more mindfulness and etc. But I do have those other supplementary things, because you can't do mindfulness for 24 hours a day, right? After a year and a bit of taking a break, only now am I starting to sleep more than 3-4 hours a night, you know? Yeah, so insomnia is a side effect of this too, right? So like it's terrifying going through it, but I think the most simple things, like just doing art or just sitting by yourself and learning mindfulness, all of these sorts of things are so important to deal with it. And I feel like a lot of us deal with this with the after work drinks, or
Yes.
the odd wine at dinner. I think that's usually the escape, or the medicine. It was for me, but I think when you take things like that away, you really have to live in your own skin, and you got to figure out a process to do it. That's what the art is about. That's what mindfulness is about.
First of all, thank you, mate, for all of that you've shared. Like, that's all the deep personal stuff, and the anxiety attacks, and how they escalate from a thought to rumination to the anxiety attack. And for those that haven't experienced it, I'll add from my experience that you go from a thought that escalates very quickly to something that's not real, and that's what makes the anxiety come on. And it's almost, I call it like looking through the window, right? So you're on the inside looking out the window, and it's sort of like where you are on the inside, this is where the problem is, the anxiety, and this is the thinking of the things that's going to go wrong or the problem. And even though it can be as unreal and ridiculous as a movie, and you can almost like see that on the other side of the window, on the outside, life is normal, you can't take yourself there. It's, I don't know if that's explaining it right, but it's, what I'm trying to say is, you can see it and understand it happening, but you in the moment, you can't. When I've had a real anxiety attack, you can't control it or stop it, and that becomes a scary thing in itself. Because I remember sitting on the sofa and just felt the burning heat rise, and my wife said to me, she said, "Shit, you just went red," and I was just frozen. I couldn't even respond to her, and she was like, "Did you hear me?" And I was just, so it took a moment, and then she sort of, was like, "Oh, what's going on?" And inside, I felt like I was burning, and all I could think about was what had made this happen. The rumination of the negative thought and the concern, and it was very unreal. But this was the thing, it was like almost like sort of trapped in a different dimension is what it's like. So yeah, I don't know if
just that analogy as well, Ryan, of the cover drive. It's a practiced skill of ruminating and connecting dots, and your brain just does it subconsciously. So very hard to break that cycle. It's that, you can see, like if you nick that cover drive, you later, when you reflect, you could have said, okay, I could have left that ball, right? But in the moment, your brain just reacts a certain way. Cricket analogies are great, by the way. That's why cricket is a beautiful reflection of real life.
Yep. So I have my set of analogies, and the thing that I got taught by my psychologist is that we are not our thoughts. Like, I was very much in a belief that we are what we think, and I was taught that no, our thoughts. So when we have those, you said, you can visualize it if you want to, or you can just think about it or just say it to yourself. But you say, all right, thanks for that thought. You've given me that thought for a reason, but I'm just going to put it over there on the side.
Yeah.
And the idea is that it takes away from here and puts it over on the side. And one of the things I learned before I worked with a psychologist was, if I tried to fight these and go, no, I don't want to think about it, don't want to think about it, it didn't help. But what did help was allowing it to be there, but then also making the effort to think about positive thoughts as well, which kind of drowned it out or replaced it or moved on from the negative to the other. So yes, I think we probably all go through that self-observation, and it's actually just a matter of us sharing. I think this is why group therapy is one of the best therapies, because just us two sitting here chatting has been great for me. And of course, the idea is hopefully it is great for others. And that's the point of why we do this. And what was the other thing I was thinking of when you're talking? But there's so many good points. So I think one of the things I'll have to do is get this, I'll download this and put it into Okta and get the script put out and get that turned into something that can be read. Chat GPT. Oh, and here was a thought. I was having this thought while I was preparing. So we have these hugely busy lives, getting busier with technology. And I sort of joke that the more we evolve on the outside with these, the more we've had to evolve on the inside. And first it was mindfulness and meditation. Now we're talking about, then we went through the anxiety and depression stage where people will be talking about that. Now we're this burnout stage where this has become really prevalent. And interestingly enough, I'm wondering how much Chat GPT and tools like that can take the amount of busyness off our hands so that we can spend more time with our family, so that we can save ourselves from putting ourselves in the position of potential or going through burnout. But that was one of my little thoughts while I was preparing. It's like, I can actually now see a really positive benefit. It's not just about I could do more by putting it all through Chat GPT. It's I can use Chat GPT to give myself some time back. And other tools.
I think it'll be the former, though. It'll be I can use Chat GPT to do more work, which is kind of just that inbuilt mechanism that we all have. I do want to say, though, just before just a thought, I guess, is we're so focused on technology. And as a technology person, I guess it's a bit counterintuitive to what I do. We're so focused on technology, I think we often don't see the benefits of focusing on ourselves or the human condition to learn more about how to do things better, right?
Absolutely.
And one of the I had a conversation with a good friend, and we talked about how we always talk about nature and biology in the third person. And we are actually, when we talk about nature and biology, we're also talking about ourselves, because we're not apart from nature, we are nature, right? And as much as we may build all of these, technology solutions and new innovations, the biggest innovation I believe, will come when we focus on the human condition or the biological condition. Us understanding that as a technologist, I think is more important than building cool new things. And so ChatGPT, yes, okay, it's a step forward. Look at Elon Musk. When your technology becomes the focus, you lose the humanity. And I think a lot of what we need to do now is to double down on ourselves, double down on human beings. And I don't know how that's going to happen in the workplace, the way it is at the moment, which is a lot of my frustration.
Yeah. So it doesn't kind of fit with the free market or capitalism.
Correct.
And the big word that will whack in there, and it's not necessarily the case, but that's part of it, is greed. Even without going as far as that, the drive, the competitiveness to win, is another factor, I think, in it. But yeah, I absolutely agree. You know, this has been my thing about how I say we've evolved on the outside with technology so much that we're now being forced to evolve on the inside. You know, that's looking at the human aspect of it. You know, one of the things around AFQY is it's a technology, or started as a technology networking event. And I've always been passionate about people through my own personal experiences, which I've shared a lot of them. And more, AFQY is becoming focused on people. And here we are talking about burnout. So, hey, just thinking of time and letting people get back to work. Maybe we should keep going and keep them from work. But what I was going to do is do my little summary and give you the opportunity to have a think about what's your closing summary. What are your remarks that you'd like to share? Whether it be a little bit of a summary or just a random thought, whatever. It's over to you, mate. And I'll first of all start off by saying again, thank you so much for sharing so much personal information that normally people aren't so willing to do. And it's beautiful when they do, because listening to it, we all learn from it, and we all have the empathy for it, and it actually evokes the willingness to share from myself as well. So hopefully people that are watching are feeling a little bit more comfortable with sharing, a little bit more informed, and if they need help, then they'll be willing to seek it, whether it be the first level from their friends and family or the next level from a professional. I'd always recommend reaching out to a professional. I work with a psychologist, and the age-old there's something wrong with you if you do that. Well, pretty much bullshit. It's actually so beneficial, and it actually becomes quite enjoyable too, because you feel good about learning the stuff and understanding what's happening. So just to do a little bit of recap, we heard about Sarvajith's journey around burnout and how it came about in 2021 after the first year of COVID, and there was heavy workload with the tourism industry, and then swapping to a startup while having his firstborn, and then we heard a little bit more about what he went through and the time he took off, and looking at things and his own observations and what he did, to then working with a psychologist and some of the exercises he did, from writing down what are the thoughts that come to mind through the experience of a anxiety attack, and how he was able to see how the dots were joined as part of the process, along with some medication. We didn't touch too much on that. Craig Hudson, who was with Xero and now with NZTE, has also mentioned in his journey. So I just wanted to add, and the sense that is to say to more people, this is not uncommon, and it's not a problem. So let's forget how we saw this in the past and see it for what it is. It's a really beautiful thing to be looking after ourselves. And then into recovery, where you started looking at a range of things that kept you present. And that was learning the piano, learning art, and I'll just bring Ed over his comment back up, learning to be a good husband and father. And he says it's a forever job. So there we go, everybody. It's one of those ones that we will never perfect. I know that myself as well. And I think it's the same for being a good wife, or a good friend, or a good human, is it's a forever job. So lovely comment, thanks, Ed. And that brings me to the end of a bit of an overview, and hand over to you for closing summary, final word, your thoughts, whatever you'd like to say.
Yeah, I'd like to say to everyone, anyone watching or who's going to watch this, if you do feel like you're starting to notice some physiological or just thought patterns that you haven't before, don't ignore them. In fact, lean in more towards them. The answer often, I don't know yet, I'm still learning, but I feel like that's where the answer to kind of what the journey could be for you may lie. It's never a definite yes or no. Things will change, but don't be afraid to face it. And a lot of your close people, like your family and friends, can really help, and mine have. I have to give a big shout out to my brother, who, Nikhil, who's, all through the craziness of, I use him kind of like a sounding board. I message him a lot, and some are good and some are not so good. But he's been an amazing older brother, and that's, again, I say I'm lucky. I mean it, right? Like, I have some amazing people around me, being able to share some stories with my close friends, and I think that's where it starts. And then obviously the professional help is very important as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for those closing remarks. And I think that's a really beautiful way to close out. And just to reiterate that, is if you're feeling something and you're not sure what it is, or it seems a bit out of place, lean into it and find out what it is. Talk to your friends, and even in the early stages, because the earlier you catch anything like anxiety, depression, burnout, the better for you, because you can start getting treatment sooner and also stop yourself going so far in. In the group post about the event, I mentioned 2 people. You talk about how different people handle things differently. This whole series was kicked off by Jacinda's resignation and talking about how she didn't have any more fuel in the tank. That doesn't necessarily mean that she was experiencing burnout. It's a pretty typical way of saying it. So I'd actually love to get her on and hear what the actual story is. But
Ryan, I have to 1 sec. I can't believe I thanked my brother and I didn't thank my wife and my son.
It's like the Oscars speech. It's a famous Oscars speech.
Hold on. Nikhil's great and all, but oh my goodness, Amber and my son Aaron, they have plucked me out of the darkest places. And I can tell you some places got very, very dark. And if it wasn't for them, I probably wouldn't be here. And that is the honest truth, is Amber and my son. How could I forget? Oh my goodness. I apologize if they ever see this.
Yes. Look, it's very easy to do those things. I myself as well quite often forget the most important. And I don't know how it happens. There must be some science to it, because it's repeated by many people. So yeah, you got it in there. You remembered. So let's cherish that. And edit
it before you share it, please.
No problem. Well, sadly for you, it's already live, but I can actually go, I think, and cut. They've added part of the new feature is you can cut snippets now. But no, look, it's just part of it, mate. Like, this is actually a beautiful part of an example of it, right? So just the simple thing of forgetting the most important people in your life when you're thanking people, so easily done. And even in the best of times. So hey, and let's just come back to that point. A couple of key points is that we're doing this to help share and provide awareness and give people the insights. We're doing it to help other people feel comfortable about seeking help, whether it's just asking a friend or the next step to going professional. And that's why we're sharing personal examples. And just want to say thank you for everything you've shared today. It's been really eye-opening and has given me a lot. So I know that it will have given everyone who watches this a lot as well. Thank you very much for all your time and everything you've shared today, Sarvajith. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. All right, well, with that, we'll say ka kite anō to everybody and get them back to what they're doing. I won't say get back to work. And you go and give Amber a hug and say thanks very much from Ryan the Lion. See you soon, brother.
See ya. Take it easy.
Cheers.